As a first-time attendee to the OSEP Leadership Conference, this has been such a powerful 3 days. So thank you all, and let's celebrate all of our presenters, our teams, our states, our grantees. I know we have a lot to think about moving forward about how we ensure positive outcomes for our infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities and their families. So I know there's going to be a lot of reflecting over the next couple of days. As we begin to wind down this day 3, we will now have the opportunity to hear from our 2 division directors in OSEP. Dr. Greg Kaur is the division director of the Monitoring State Improvement and Planning Team, and Dr. Larry Wexler is the division director of Research to Practice. So first, we will welcome up Greg.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Greg Kaur, as Shannon said, and I want to acknowledge Shannon for doing such a wonderful job being our MC throughout this whole conference. Larry and I, who work very closely together and have for years, had to arm wrestle to determine who goes first. And I'm going, which means I'll have enough time to do my presentation. Larry and I kid each other a lot. All right, so I'm so pleased that you were all able to attend and participate in this year's conference, the first in-person OSEP Leadership and Project Directors Conference since 2019, which seems like a long, long time ago. It's good seeing old friends, although there were fewer and fewer of them, and meeting a lot of new acquaintances who will soon be friends, and seeing more and more of those. So whether you have been in the field for a long time or new to this conference, welcome, and we really appreciate you being here. Next slide. Okay. It's been my practice to kind of indulge myself by showing off pictures of my kids. In the early days, I actually brought my daughter, Evie, here when she was just learning how to walk. So, it has been a long time. Here's a picture of them, Evie and her brother, Liam, when they're ages 5 and 3. Back in 2012, if you could imagine, that's such a long time ago. And then fast forward, if we could go to the next slide. Here they are in 2023. So, shh, they would be totally mortified. You did what? Although they are never reluctant to post their pictures on Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, all of the above, and share them with who knows. But here they are, ages 14 for Liam and 16 for Evie. They are both up at a summer camp in Western New York, Chautauqua Lake, and Evie is hey, Chautauqua Lake, let's hear it, right. Evie is a counselor this year and making a salary, a small one, and she complains that she would be making more at McDonald's, but good experience and a great resume builder. Liam is a camper and an aspiring counselor, but they've been up there for a good part of the summer and are enjoying it. Since we last met, it's been my pleasure to be the director of the Monitoring and State Improvement Planning Division since 2011. And I would like all of the MSIP staff who are here in the room to stand up. A talented and wonderful group of folks, and I was going to ask you to give them a round of applause, but you did that without me having to prompt you. I want to express my deep appreciation to all of the MSIP staff for their amazing work, and especially those who have helped prepare for this week's conference. And I want to provide a special shout out to Diana Yu, who's way back in the back of the room, who is a human dynamo, has been just amazing in attending to all of the details for this conference, and who, without complaint, when I gave her my rough talking points last night, created this slideshow. So Diana is marvelous, and wanted to make sure she got acknowledged. Despite all the challenges and changes, we've been able to complete, we, MSIP, have been able to complete an impressive body of work. MSIP has 4 homeroom teams. That's been the case for some number of years, decades. Teams A, B, C, and D. Team A is Al Jones. Team B is Christine Pilgrim. All right. Yeah, she's something. Team C is Angela Tanner Dean. And Team D is Matthew Schneer, who I saw somewhere in the back of the room. All right, we've got a lot of team spirit. We are a matrix organization, so in addition to the homeroom teams, and each of those has a dozen or so states assigned to it. In addition to that, we also have implementation teams that are headed up by facilitators. And I'm going to give you a brief rundown of each of these teams. Before I do that, I want to thank all of you for, especially state folks, for attending the state team meetings and sharing your success stories and thoughtful feedback for OSEP during those sessions. And we will take that feedback back to the office to us and consider that as we move forward. So we have 5 implementation teams. 4 of them actually presented this week, so you may have been in one of the sessions from our implementation teams. First is the DMS implementation team, DMS, under the leadership of Matt Schneer and Kate Moran, who you've heard a lot from this week, as she was the primary presenter of the General Supervision Guidance. So this has been an ambitious undertaking. We developed the conceptual model, the process, the underlying protocols, and then stood up a DMS work group, which was not an easy undertaking, given that we didn't really have enough staff for all the work groups. So we basically kind of shanghaied some people to join the DMS work group, and they've done a tremendous job. We're still in the early stages of implementation, finishing up cohort 1, and continue to make adjustments and improvements. Second is the data implementation team under the leadership of Christine Pilgrim. I was waiting for the shout out. Woohoo! Christine has certainly had her hands full this year. The SPP APR determinations process is an enormous undertaking in itself. But on top of that, Christine and company have had to develop the new SPP APR information collections for both Parts B and Part C, and subjected those to the Paperwork Reduction Act process. The 60-day comment period just closed, and the team is busy reading and responding to those comments, and it will be posted again in the Federal Register for the 30-day comment period. So I hope you've had a chance to see it and provide any comments that you might have. We're hoping that will be released sometime in the early fall. And then there's a third thing that they've been working on, which is work with the contractor for the SPP APR platform, which is a very time-consuming and technical process. Fortunately, we have been able to hire a couple people to assist with all this. Sharon Loza is our new implementation team facilitator over here in the red. We're really happy to have Sharon on board, and she entered OSEP right in the thick of the work. So, you know, she has no illusions now about how much work this is, but I don't see her running out of the room. And also Rebecca Smith as our data analyst. Rebecca's not here, but she will be a tremendous help with, particularly with the data and technological side. The program implementation team, under the able leadership of Jennifer Simpson and Al Jones. They've also had their hands full this year. Jennifer and team developed this year's application package, including some last-minute changes under the General Education Provisions Act, GEPA. They conducted webinars, TA sessions for states, and dealt with a number of unanticipated challenges, which we seem to get more and more of, many of those coming at the 11th hour. Nonetheless, they were able to push out nearly $15 billion of IDEA formula grant money by July 1st. So let's hear it for the program team. I want to check my time, make sure there's enough time for my brother Larry here. Physical implementation team, also under the leadership of Matt Schneer. They've been working hard across a number of areas to ensure that states fully understand their responsibilities and use the IDEA funds properly. Some of the areas they work on include MFS, maintenance of physical support, very important and high stakes. Part C MOE, excess costs, indirect costs, LEA MOE, and CEIS, allocations, private school proportionate share, and audits, to name a few. There are many, many other areas that they cover. In addition, the physical implementation team members, we call that the FIT, maybe not the best acronym, they were responsible for developing the physical protocols for DMS and training our staff and providing technical assistance to states on that, and participating in many of the cohort 1 monitoring reviews. So they've done a terrific work. Last but not least is our training and leadership capacity building, training, learning, and capacity building, TLC work group under the leadership of Jennifer Barrett-Zitkus, JBZ, as we fondly call her, and Angela Tanner-Dean, the ADD. Unlike the other implementation teams, TLC has no permanent staff members assigned to it, since we don't really have sufficient personnel at this time to do that. But JBZ and Angela have done a tremendous job of developing internal training sessions to ensure that our staff continue to develop and grow and acquire all the competencies needed to carry out their responsibilities. Also, the TLC has supported our customer service team. We have a customer service representative assigned to each of the 4 teams. We're one short right now, but going through interviews, so we should have a 4th one shortly. And they are our direct liaisons with constituents, primarily parents, who call in with issues. And they're wonderful people. They're really able to listen, be patient, advise callers of requirements and their rights, and kind of help them resolve whatever issue it is that they bring to us. So this is just part of what we do. MSIP and OSEP also does a tremendous amount of policy work. I think you've probably heard some of it this week. It includes questions and answers on serving children with disabilities placed by their parents in private schools, the discipline behavior guidance, which came out about a year ago, and then most recently, hot off the press, is the general supervision guidance. These resources are all located on the policy guidance section of our IDEA website. And here are some links to our primary websites where you can find MSIP-related content. And I'm not going to read through those right now, so I can relinquish the podium here for Larry. So finally, In closing, I'm very proud of our staff and the work they do to assist you in your work to improve outcomes for children with disabilities and their families. The folks at MSIP are very committed, very hardworking. I want to thank all of you for participating in this year's conference. I heard a number of folks comment that not only were the sessions excellent, but the opportunity to network and have in-person connections were incredibly valuable and much missed. So please take this positive energy back with you as you return home. Safe travels, and I'm going to introduce Larry, bring him up, but also tell you that there's one more session, the Washington Update, that comes after us. So don't run out the door after Larry. Dr. Wexler, well, maybe they will. Don't say anything that's going to make them run out the door.
There's nothing like starting a presentation with the opportunity to fall up the steps. And, well, I may take a slightly different tack than Greg did. You know, we did a book study, The Art of Gathering, and our favorite chapter was Never Start a Funeral with Logistics. And I'm going to violate that and do some quick thank yous. Certainly thank you to the committee that's done an incredible job. Unsung heroes, our interpreters. They have done a great job. As well as our transcriber, who has done a great job. Thanks especially Mito, Kristen, Rochelle, Diana, who have done just yeoman's work on this. And AIR has just done a spectacular job. The fact that there has been no catastrophes here, the work that's done behind the scenes for a 1,600-person conference is really pretty spectacular. So thank you to AIR. Stephanie Jackson leads it. Now, people keep saying, are you going to show a video? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? I have 15 minutes, you know. It takes me 15 minutes to say good morning. So this is me going to be on speed, if you don't mind. I didn't think I had time for Metro's story, but it's been popular demand. I will say I no longer ride it since the pandemic. I rarely go in the office, but in true form, Metro is bankrupt at the moment. They have no money, and their solution in true Metro form is they just purchased, they put a contract out to purchase $2 billion of new train cars, which they don't have the money to purchase and will fill with no people. But anyway, that's my Metro story. So you've been talked at a great deal, and it's begun to feel like professional development. And I'm reminded of the teacher who once said, I hope I die during professional development, because the transition from life to death will be so subtle. I gotta tell you, I love that one, you know. All right, so here's your takeaways for the rapid fire information I'm going to provide you. Stay true to your values. Do the right thing. And tough times don't last, but tough people do. And that's a big... So here's a factoid about Greg Core. So I was, back in the late 80s, I was the director of state monitoring and also the chief of staff to the state director of special education when OSEP decided to pay us a visit. Yay! We were so excited, you know. So Greg was one of the state contacts. He was on the monitoring team that came to us, and I will say at the exit conference, as our litany of faults was listed, my state director, who she was a pistol to say the least, and I may have picked up a few of her traits. My state director, after the long list was given, said, "I have one thing to say to you, OSEP. We've got lawyers too." So, but Greg, things must have resonated with Greg because he suggested I apply to OSEP. I did, and in fact was hired, and 30-something years later, we are working together. Our offices are about 5 feet apart. His is bigger than mine. We flipped a coin for that office, and he won. His deputy did the flipping, I might add. Not that I think anything happened, but the nice thing is we are still really good friends, but we do refer to each other as OSEP dinosaurs. So first slide. In the vein of Greg, time flies. I don't see it up there. There it is. All right, so I showed this picture the last time we were in person. I think in this room. I'm not sure. And this is a picture of my grandson who was a couple of months old. He's on his back. He's in a black and white striped onesie with his arms spread out, okay? Here's what he looks like today, okay? He's a 5-year-old waiting to go to kindergarten. He's at a restaurant in California, and he's eating the biggest shrimp I've ever seen, which is one of his favorites. So he was a beneficiary of Part C. And I salute Marcella Frankowski from Maryland. Her staff did a beautiful job with him. And he's my grandson. We refer to him as Ra, the sun god. So he lives 4 blocks from me. So I get to see him a lot. So, you know, time flies. I started teaching 53 years ago, before 95 years before 94-142 was passed. Richard Nixon was the president. So speaking of time flying, this was me in one of my first teaching jobs. All right, this is a picture of a really handsome young guy. He's got hair to his shoulders. He has a big, bushy beard. He has wire-rimmed glasses and looks like Charles Manson. Time does fly. How they could let me around children was, yeah. It shows the bad judgment of the school system, I think. But, and you can move it to the blank slide next, please. Yeah, enough. Before continuing, I wanted to say something about my colleague, Renee Bradley. We were partners running the Research to Practice division for 13 years. She was always a terrific colleague and friend and was a great loss. Now, she didn't die. She went to the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, which may not be that far from the other reality, but she's doing an absolutely spectacular job there. And one of the things that she's in charge of is all of the responses from the department to the school shootings. And she's been doing that since Columbine, and it's a huge job. But I miss Renee. That's the truth. She wouldn't come. I asked her to come today, but she said no. So people always ask me, why have I stayed so long? I mean, look at me. It's time. And my response is always the same. Look who I get to work with in the research to practice division. Okay. I simply cannot imagine a smarter, more dedicated, caring group of people, including our 4 associate divisions directors who support our staff. I do not have a weak link in my division. Now, that's not to say I don't have some rather quirky people, okay? But these people walk the dedication talk. I only hire content specialists. I don't hire grant managers or project managers. I hire grant growers, thought partners who support the growth of our grants and projects. I've hired almost every staff person in research to practice. I hire them for their content knowledge, but also for their chutzpah, okay, for their moxie. I try to hire tough-minded and tough, dedicated people who will support you in this audience. That's their job. In my first teaching job with children with the most significant cognitive disabilities, I received an outstanding rating, even looking the way I did, which was, however, the principal in the comment section on the form, her comment was, thank God someone's willing to be in a room with these children. Okay, that was what they had to say. And I'm going to get back to this, being in the room with these children. In the 80s, I was the director of a special education program. It had about 20 teachers and, related services personnel, paraprofessionals. On the first day, I met with the faculty. I told them that I expected that every day there'd be a line of staff outside my door with requests. And I told them the answer would always be yes if the request was grounded in benefiting kids and families, because that's why we're doing what we do. That was the culture that I was trying to create. So, a number of years ago, during the Trump-DeVos administration, I was selected for a high-level position in the department. However, at a very high level, that selection was vetoed. And that's certainly the authority. It's a hierarchical organization. That's just the way the cookie crumbles, so to speak. When I pressed for a rationale, here's what I was told. You advocate too strongly for your program. Thank you. I was being told that I advocate too strongly for IDEA, for children with disabilities and for their families. Now, I was somewhat irritated. But after that meeting, when I had time to reflect on what was being said, I didn't get the position, which was fine, but I realized I had just received the greatest compliment someone in the disability field could receive. Mark Twain said you could never go wrong by doing the right thing. Our work is not about advancement or position or ego, it's about service. Each person in this audience, whether a discretionary grantee or state staff, is committed to service, and I thank you for that. I'll finish with a quote that I've used before, but I know is still relevant. Michelangelo said 600 years ago, the problem with humans is not that they aim too high and fail, but aim too low and succeed. My expectations remain high. Just being in the room with those kids is not enough. I know you feel the same way. Thank you, and have a good trip home.
All right, thank you, Greg and Larry. We are grateful for your leadership and support in OSEP. Next, we are going to welcome our policy panel up to the stage, and while they're coming up, I'll tell you a little bit about them. Our panelists will provide their expert perspectives on current policy decisions being debated on Capitol Hill that affect children with disabilities. Today's panelists include Kuna Tavalin, Senior Policy and Advocacy Advisor for the Council for Exceptional Children. So Kuna. And then we have Sharon Walsh, the IDEA Infant and Toddler Coordinators Association and Division for Early Childhood of the CEC. And last but not least is Diana Autin, Executive Co-Director and Policy Director, the National Center for Parent Leadership, Advocacy, and Community Empowerment. After our panel, we will be hearing a few final words from OSEP leaders, so please hang tight after the panel is finished. And without further ado, I turn it over to Kuna.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you, Dr. Wexler, for warming up the crowd for us. It's kind of a hard act to follow, but we'll do our best. So I'm Kuna Tavalin. I am the Senior Policy and Advocacy Advisor for the Council for Exceptional Children. And so I want to just start by kind of grounding you in where we're coming from at my organization in terms of policy. I'm going to ground you in our perspective, where we come from in terms of public policy, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what Congress is up to in terms of legislation, in terms of annual appropriations, our funding of IDEA and other programs, and some hot topics about education. I'm then going to turn it over to my colleagues Sharon and Diana to talk more specifically about the early childhood space and the family engagement space. Very helpful, thank you. At CEC, you'll see by our policy priorities, there are 5 of them, that they really encompass everything in the special ed space. Protecting and supporting IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act. In terms of legislation, that's not a bill that's currently has a high prospect of being reauthorized, so it's more of a slow burn right now. Protecting and expanding policies outside of the IDEA that also impact students with disabilities. That kind of broad category does have more potential for movement in small chunks, like in education research and in workforce development. But again, we're not seeing a lot of movement on that space. Our third is strengthening the profession. I think you all in this room know that special education is the most persistent shortage area when it comes to the profession, and so that's work that we lean really hard on, both through professional development and also through policy. And funding for IDEA, I mentioned briefly, and I'll go into some more detail about the annual appropriations process, but this is a really high priority for us and one of the very few things that actually has to happen each year. And then finally, advocating for policies that promote safe, inclusive, and supportive schools. Renee Bradley was channeled earlier. There's a lot of work happening right now in the school mental health professional space, which we are also very supportive of. And so it's actually those last 3 bullets where we're seeing the most movement right now. To sum up some recent congressional actions, the big law that was just signed into law that impacts our policy priorities is the Fiscal Responsibility Act. It was signed into law last month. This, for folks who weren't tuned in too deeply into Congress, this was the bill that avoided default on our nation's debt. It also included a negotiation to cap annual appropriations for both the upcoming fiscal year 24, and the following year, fiscal year 25. So the agreement would essentially level funding from this year to the next, and then allow for a 1% increase for fiscal year 25. Now, I think everybody in this room knows that level funding is actually a cut in terms of real spending ability. And so this will definitely pose challenges. That's just foreshadowing for the next slide. Another bill that's only passed in the House is the Parents' Bill of Rights, and I'm going to have Diana talk a little bit more about that during her part of this session. But just one of, this is very clearly part of the House Republican policy agenda. There are many education-related policy agenda items there that are going to see movement in the House, but not see any action in the Senate. So this is more politics-based than policy-based at the moment, but always important to keep an eye on because things are changing fast around here. And one of the, I think, most alarming amendments during the House floor process to this bill is that 2/3 of Republicans voted in favor of an amendment to discard the Department of Education altogether. It was not adopted, but that's a really large margin. And what we've seen is that the party continues to galvanize around some of these issues where in years past we might have seen more dissenters. Right now there's a strong pull in that kind of direction of significantly limiting the federal government when it comes to education, and especially programs like IDEA. That's incredibly problematic, just to understate it. One of, I think, our most important advocacy tools for CEC and for a lot of partner organizations, both in the special education space, in the disability space, and also in the more broad kind of school education space, is the IDEA Full Funding Act. The Grants to States program, Part B, has legislative language within the law that says that Congress should fund up to 40% of the excess cost to educate a student with disabilities. We call that full funding. That's Congress fulfilling their part of the funding promise. And so we have this annual advocacy tool, which is the IDEA Full Funding Act. It's a bill that would, over the course of 10 years, provide gradual steps to get us from where we are right now, which is roughly 12% of full funding, to that 40%. Now, we know that can't happen in a single year for a variety of reasons, partly because politically, I think Congress would not be interested in putting that much funding in. We've already seen that year over year, but also, just on the other end, managing the funds and so on. So this would do that over 10 years. It's a bill that is introduced by Senator Chris Van Hollen, who's a Democrat from Maryland, and Representative Jared Huffman, who's a Democrat from California. The House, so one of the things about sending your slides in advance is that things change. So the bill was introduced in the beginning of July, actually during the annual Special Education Legislative Summit that CEC puts on in collaboration with CASE. And so we were able to advocate in support of this bill during our advocacy week, and there have been other groups since then who have done similar work around this bill. So there are now 28 senators co-sponsoring, and I believe 84 members of the House, and in the House there are 5 Republicans, which is a really big deal for us. I think the bipartisanship still shows a lot of strength, so that is one of our North Stars. And of course the bill aims to, solve for the underfunding of IDEA. It does not have really any prospect of being enacted into law, but what it does serve, again, is as a tool for advocacy. So I think it's really important. It's a natural hook for educating on the need to increase funding for the law. So as I mentioned earlier, annual appropriations is the one item of business that really is a must-pass every year in our space. And I expect that we're going to face some pretty significant challenges with that right now. My colleagues in the field and I are struggling to game out the end game of this process this year because we have some really deep fissures between the House and the Senate in terms of how they want to go about it. So in a typical appropriations cycle, the president releases his budget in February. That's the official kickoff of the process. And then members and stakeholders weigh in with appropriators. They take those requests and they ponder them. They hold hearings. Secretary Cardona testified before the House and Senate subcommittee panels. And then they start to write their bills and move them through the process. That usually happens in the House first, then the Senate, and everything needs to be wrapped in a bow by September 30th, or there needs to be an alternative route. Right now in the process, the House has actually marked up their bill. They did so a few weeks ago. In the subcommittee, so in the Appropriations Committee is a larger committee, and then there are 12 topical subcommittees. So, excuse me, the bill was marked up in the subcommittee that considers the Labor, Health and Human Services, Education and related agencies bill. Thank you. And that bill would really dramatically slash funding to public education, about 28% cut to the department. This is all a snapshot in time, just to be clear. So this is not going to happen. This is the opening bid from the House, right? Just to be clear, because I don't want you to walk away from a great conference being like, oh, it's doomsday. So IDEA programs appear to be spared from those cuts. They appear to be level funded. We don't have programmatic details because those come out in what's called a committee report, which comes out when the House considers the bill in the full committee typically. Right now, I keep pressing refresh on the Appropriations Committee website to wait for their announcement of a markup potentially tomorrow, but there are a lot of kind of sidebar politics happening in the House that lead me to believe it's possible that they won't do that before they go out for the August recess, which is interesting and possibly beneficial to us because that would take away their leverage to negotiate for these really big cuts. Now, I said IDEA appears to be spared, but programs like Title I would see an 80% cut, and schools can't, if we fully funded IDEA and didn't fund anything else in schools, they wouldn't work, right? Well, I won't finish that sentence. The Senate, since we drafted this slide, has actually scheduled their markup of that bill for tomorrow. We'll see the bill text when they start the markup. I don't know when we'll get the committee report. This subcommittee has not done a markup in a very long time. The last time that I saw a subcommittee markup, I think, was 2015, where they wouldn't broadcast it still on, you would show up in the room and then ask the staff afterwards, what's this program funded at, what's that program funded at, because they were not particularly transparent. But in the Senate, the chair and ranking member of the full committee, Patty Murray from Washington State and Susan Collins from Maine, have pledged to be transparent, do their work on time, work together. What I anticipate coming from that committee in our space is basically an extension of current year funding, level funding. Now, one other caveat about the funding level is that there was a pretty significant bump up in education spending from fiscal year 22 to 23. So level funding in a given year is a problem, but I think that Congress had the foresight to anticipate challenges this year and give a larger bump up last year. So just for example, the personnel preparation grant program had been level funded for a very long time at $90 million annually. It got a small bump to 95 in fiscal year 22. It went to 115 million for fiscal year 23. So there are a number of programs that are actually in better shape than they have been in the past. And so if those end up being level funded and not cut, I think that it will be easier to endure than had we been at fiscal year 22 levels. And I'll try to stay out of the weeds on that, but you get the point. There are a lot of variables, and it's not really clear, like I said, what's going to happen at the end of this process. There have been there's been a ramp up in rumblings, I'm sorry folks from OSEP, about government shutdown on October 1st, which is what happens when Congress doesn't do anything. And there's a really strong push from the Freedom Caucus portion of the House Republican caucus to slash funding much deeper than that agreed upon level that I mentioned in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. They see that as the high watermark and not as the requisite funding level. So they've put their bills at much lower levels, and it's certainly going to cause a fight. Yeah, I'm lightening the room, right? I actually think I've already covered all of this. Excuse me. The last thing I want to talk about just really briefly is what folks in Congress are talking about. So we call them hot topics in education, and there are some opportunities still, I think, and then some threats for sure. Youth mental health continues to be a bipartisan area of concern. We saw a really, I think, really talented panel of witnesses speaking to this issue in a recent Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee hearing, a HELP committee in the Senate. We have a lot of really grim data about the conditions of youth mental health right now, and we also have some new investments, or I guess they're not new, but they're increased investments to get more school mental health personnel into school buildings, qualified and into buildings. And the conversation continues. So I think that is helpful. We also, of course, have a personnel shortages challenge. And we saw at the very opening of this Congress, Chairman Sanders from Vermont, who is the chair of that HELP committee in the Senate, held a town hall to talk about teacher shortages and connected it to teacher pay, but also a lot more than just pay, because we know that these are complex pipeline issues as well, right? From getting folks into programs and then also keeping them in schools and so on and so forth. And then we have this persistent kind of relatively new, but I think very challenging set of issues that we sum up as the culture wars. It might be more appropriate to call them the intentional attempt to roll back civil rights. They're creating there's been this really you saw the waiver slide that this is not the department speaking, but there have been some really troubling attacks on trans students in particular, and hearings that are not about trans students. There's been a lot of talk about parental choice. This morning I was listening to a House hearing called Generational Learning Loss: How Pandemic School Closures Hurt Students. And these continue to be partisan issues where Republicans, it's a fact, say that the school closures were due to the outsized power of teachers' unions and teachers who didn't want to work, I suppose, and that the solution is school choice, so that you can send your kids somewhere that's not going to close down. And I think it's, this is a gross oversimplification of an incredibly challenging issue. And the response, I would say, is more complicated and nuanced, because I think that was what we were facing, especially in, March, April, May 2020, which was how do we make sure, quite literally, that our school personnel and vulnerable students don't die, right, from this pandemic. And I think there's a general agreement that school closures did harm student learning for most students, but also it gets really complicated and nuanced and continues to provide an opportunity for the left and the right to be very far apart on what it was and how to respond. So these are some of the issues that we're looking at that continue to be prominent in Congress right now. I'm going to pass it on to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Kuna.
We'll skip that.
Thanks, Kuna. And we're so grateful that you are willing to hang out with us a little bit longer. We know you've had a long week and you're looking forward to getting home. I want to just start out by briefly saying that I'm fortunate enough to work with two organizations, and I'm representing both of them, and I want to take a moment and share their priorities, similar to hearing CEC's, where all of us up here are very well aligned in our priorities in many ways. First, a quick reminder that you'll hear me advocating for positions, policies, funding levels, but we are nonpartisan. So, and you were a master at being very careful, but we are very careful because we are nonpartisan. So I want to start with the ITCA, the Infant and Toddler Coordinators Association, which is the state membership organization for the Birth to 3 Part C program. And as you can see on the slide, I want to focus your attention mostly on the oval and the triangle in the center, because that is, not surprisingly, the major priority. The membership of the organization set this priority for this current year, and they're currently working to decide if it needs to be shifted for next year. But as you can see, it's pretty on tap with what we know the reality is. So the middle, the priority is, of course, access and engagement to services for all children and their families. Nothing is more important. Positive results for the families that we work with and represent. And then, of course, the three things on the sides of the oval, outside the triangle, are what we consider the three prevailing forces, challenges, priorities. And again, they won't surprise you. Workforce, absolutely, positively, the biggest. Financing, and you heard Kuna describe about financing. And Child Find efforts engaged at making sure, using our data, to make sure that we are finding, locating every child, or let me rephrase that, each and every child, no matter where they live in our states, to make sure they have available to them the early intervention program as appropriate for their needs. So that would be the priorities for ITCA. You're going to see very compatibly on the next slide would be the priorities for DEC, which is the division under the Council for Exceptional Children. You'll notice in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to dig a little deeper into the things Kuna talked about. You gave us such a great overview of the picture right now. I'll just dig in from the early childhood perspective. So the DEC priorities, not surprisingly and consistent, achieving high quality inclusion, acknowledging and addressing, not just acknowledging biases as they exist, responding appropriately to child behavior, and as Kuna talked about, when our children, particularly our little ones, sometimes they reference some little ones never experienced any social activities. They were born in COVID, they turned 3 in COVID, and suddenly they're faced in settings with other peers, and making sure that their development is on par to be able to succeed is truly a challenge. Creating and maintaining strong family partnerships, adequately equipping a workforce, a highly qualified or highly effective workforce, and then make sure environments, interactions, instruction, and supports are high quality. So ambitious agenda, but nonetheless one I would be surprised if we wouldn't all embrace. I'm going to echo some of what Kuna was talking about with, thank you. I want to ground us just for the minute in this year's funding. This is the money you got July 1. And as Kuna said, we're still grossly underfunded, there's no question. Any program that relates to children and families or communities' needs I think we would all, at least many of us would probably agree, underfunded. But in the year we're currently in, we saw some increases in the programs that are important to us. A couple of them are highlighted on the screen. This occurred, by the way, after several punts down the road, continuing resolutions, which we're used to. Kuna mentioned them. We got a New Year's present just recently in our last New Year's, and they finally signed an omnibus bill that covered all the federal programs because they just couldn't get the work done any sooner or come to agreement. So we got increases in Part C, as you can see, a $43.7 million increase, an $850 million increase in the 611 Part B program, and then in the 619 program, a $10.5 million increase. Again, underfunded, as Kuna said, a $20 million increase in personnel preparation. Do we need more? Absolutely. But at least that set the stage, a little bit of increase. And sad to say, as you heard, that is not going to be the reality for this year. You received those funds in your grant award, as Greg reminded us, July 1, and that's the money now that will be distributed and spent for the most part this year. Despite all of the proposals in the last couple of presidents' budgets for policy changes in birth to 3, only one has maintained steady and has been enacted each year. So, and it exists, it's in current law through the funding bill, it's in the president's budget again this year, and it is the money, it is the allowance permissive for Part C lead agencies to spend Part C money on children who've already turned 3. We're always challenged by that, what we call the bridge between Part C and 619. That is again in the president's budget, and it's in the House bill that Kuna talked about. So we kind of think it will continue throughout. There's no reason it wouldn't. That would be the third year in a row it's been enacted into law. So on the next slide, could you keep helping me? Thank you. I appreciate that. So now, so that's where we are sitting now with the money you've got. So as Kuna said, this year is going to be totally different. So they've already negotiated the freeze, which for some people in the House is nowhere near what they want. They want drastic cuts. We're seeing some of them in the House committee bill, subcommittee bill. We're anxiously awaiting to see what's in the full committee bill, but we know it's at least a freeze. We also know that the president's budget request, which we got earlier this year, again contains significant increases. So, if you were looking at just that, the first step out of the gate, everybody was, yeah, good, lots of good proposed increases. That was step one. This is step two, which you kind of just want to sit back and go, this is going to be dreadful. But as Kuna reminded us, let's pause, hold our breath, or take a breath. We'll see what's in the House full committee bill, and then we've got to see what the Senate does. But nobody, safe to say, nobody's getting increases, right? The question is, will you freeze? And I hate to say that's good news for us. Good news truly this year, I think, will be if you get a freeze. But the bigger issue at the moment, as Kuna said, this is a must pass. It has to. And so if we don't, nothing's going to pass before September 30th. We know that. If we don't get agreement on a continuing resolution, and it's kind of like watching people, I don't know what it's like watching chicken on the railroad tracks or whatever you call it. But, it's like, we're going to shut the government down. We're going to shut the government down. If you don't do this, we're going to shut the government down. Nobody wants, well, maybe a few people, but mostly nobody wants to, but they're going to threaten it up until the very end. And in fact, this time they may do it. We've done it in the last couple of years. After quite a few years of not doing it, we've done it.
Can I just say something about government shutdowns? Is that they don't poll well for any party.
Yeah.
And typically, Congress will get to an agreement at some point. But this brinksmanship about government shutdowns, it actually does everybody a disservice. The House will blame the White House. The Senate will say, it's not our fault, we got to a bipartisan bill. And when you ask the public, they're going to say, oh, these guys don't know how to do their job. None of them. So it's not a particularly helpful tactic for anybody. And
Thank you. By the way, you should know this. Kuna and I do this together a lot, so we're really used to this back and forth, so please continue. Okay, so let's just briefly take a peek. As Kuna said, we think we've got a freeze, and in IDEA, but we don't know what that means for individual programs. Frankly, that could mean an increase for some and cuts for others. The other program it looks like we have a freeze in is childcare development block grant. However, not so much for Head Start. $750 million cut in Head Start, and that translates immediately into thousands of seats for children in Head Start programs. $35 million cut in the maternal and child health block grant. Hold on to your seats if you're early childhood. Elimination of all funding for the preschool development grant, which we just had ramped back up again. So Promised Neighborhoods, no money. English language acquisition, no money. Social and emotional learning grants, no money. Teacher quality partnerships, and the list goes on and on and on. How many programs is it?
I don't know.
Yeah,
Too many.
it was too many. So, as Kuna said, we'll see numbers as we go, and there's a lot of advocacy going on right now behind the scenes. Various groups are all in line working together across all of, I'd say, the education space, the disability space, the early childhood space, all the family groups, parent groups, all working together. But interestingly enough, the law that Kuna described that saved us on the debt ceiling also included a sanction for brinksmanship, to use your word. And if we get to New Year's Eve and we do not have a bill agreed to and signed into law, we all lose 1% of current funding, rescinded automatically by law. So supposedly that's supposed to make them play nicer together, but we'll see. So therefore, on that news, I have two things that I'm going to call opportunities. We okay? Yeah. Two things I'm going to call opportunities for the moment because we like to think a little bit positively, and frankly, we do. So parallel to what Kuna said with the Part B Special Ed 611 full funding has been for the last two Congresses, and now this Congress, it will be the third time, that we're going to have a bill that parallels the Part B full funding bill. And it's a bill called Funding Early Childhood is the Right Idea. And the pun is intended, obviously. And it would create a glide path for Part C appropriations or authorizations and 619 preschool. So it's the same idea. Set the pattern out, so the glide path of 5 years, and the thing to remember is it doesn't automatically write the check, but it's a tremendous advocacy tool. Because right now, when advocates go to the Hill and say fund early childhood in IDEA, and they look at the statute as it exists now, it says give Part C such sums as may be necessary. Give preschool special ed grants such sums as may be necessary. Statutory term, but who's going to give money to something like that, right? So we want dollars in there so that the advocates can use those as a tool when we work with the Congress on trying to get funding. Mark DaSy, who's a real hero in the IDEA early childhood space, from some of you from California, is introducing the bill. He is ready to go. There are probably now about 50 partner organizations across education, disability, early childhood, families that are supporting the bill, and he's really pleased about that. The hope was it will be introduced before the August recess, and we think it will. We'll keep you posted. And then we'll begin the count for co-sponsors, just like you do frankly, we need bipartisan. If anything is going to move, it needs bipartisan support. And so we do need Mark DaSy is a Democrat, so we need some Republicans to make the bill go forward.
Just want to mention to the parent centers in the audience that Mark DaSy is also the big champion who consistently has pushed for increased funding for parent centers.
Oh, interesting. Okay, great. All right, so anytime you want to, anytime. One more thing, and then I'm going to turn it to my friend and colleague, Diana. If you remember Build Back Better a couple years ago, there were lots of early childhood provisions. People worked, and people are nodding, I see, worked really hard, would have done tremendous boost to our early childhood infrastructure and availability of services across the country. Well, we didn't get it. It ended up coming out as the infrastructure bill, which was no small miracle, because that is the money right now being released to every state and jurisdiction to help build infrastructure, particularly broadband access. So good things came out of it, but we lost our early childhood pieces. So instead, just recently, the administration said, I'm not giving up, I'm going to try to do something through the executive branch, which is a common strategy White Houses do. And so there is out right now from the Administration on Children and Families in HHS, has released a notice of proposed rulemaking, which means we all want to comment. Comments are due August 28th, and it would be some changes to how we use the Child Care Development Block Grant. And some of them are pretty encouraging, okay? Just look at a couple of them. Cap family copays at no more than 7% of a family's income. Encourage states, this would be state option, to waive copayments altogether for families below 150% of the poverty level. Did some people want another percentage? Sure, but this is what what the traffic will bear, right? What the measure will go. Ensure providers are paid timely. This is huge through COVID. So if you private pay for childcare or pre-K for your child, you write a check usually for a month or a semester, regardless of whether you go or not. In a voucher program, providers weren't getting paid during COVID. So if children weren't there, they weren't getting paid in most instances. So this would change the structure for paying providers, meaning some of them could keep their jobs, keep their livelihood, pay their rent, their mortgage. And last but not least, encourage online application, make it smoother and easier for families, and particularly for families with siblings, and talk about cost savings with siblings. So opportunity, we got to grab them where we've got them. So I encourage you all to look at that and consider sending comments. And I'm going to turn it over to Diana.
Thanks very much. And we do a lot of work on a lot of different policy areas, so I'm very, very pleased and honored to be able to participate in the panel today. I'm Diana Autin, and I'm here in my capacity at National Place, the National Center for Parent Leadership, Advocacy, and Community Empowerment. You have the clicker? So the focus of National Place is to strengthen the voice of families and family-led organizations at decision-making tables at all levels, from the individual to the program to the systems level, local, state, national, across the systems that impact children and families, and with an eye towards equity and lifting up often excluded voices and perspectives so that all systems can benefit from the experiences and expertise of diverse families and the family-led organizations that support them, and also can meet the needs of all children and families. So who are our members? Our members are parent centers, many of whom are in the room today, parent training and information centers and community parent resource centers, family-to-family health information centers and family voices affiliates. Those are families that work in the health field to support families, National Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health chapters, Parent-to-Parent USA affiliates, local family empowerment centers, local family resource centers, national organizations like the Advocacy Institute and the National Federation of Families, and many, many more. And we do a lot of our work because we're a small, family-serving, family-led organization. We do a lot of our work in coalition with organizations like the Consortium for Constituents with Disabilities, as well as the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights. So I want to say today's a happy 33rd anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and also happy 90th birthday of my mother, who who was very, yes, she was really the inspiration for me, how I spent my life pursuing justice, equity, and social change. So I just wanted to recognize her, and I think it's very appropriate because she has disabilities, so she's a beneficiary of the ADA. So what are some of the hot topics for families and for parent centers? Well, first I want to say that the hot topics for parent centers are the hot topics for families, because parent centers talk to hundreds of thousands of families every year, provide training for families every year, and are hearing from families about what's happening on the ground and how it's impacting them and their children. And one of the biggest hot topics is the dueling visions of parents' rights, an exclusionary vision and an inclusionary vision. And an exclusionary vision is a vision that was represented in the House Parents' Bill of Rights that was passed, an inclusionary vision was represented in a competing resolution that was about student and parents' rights, which was really focused on, I think, what most of us think of as our important parent rights, which is really the rights of all parents and parents of all children, whereas the other bill was really focused on allowing a small group of parents to really drown out the voices of many, many parents, including parents of the children who are least well served by our current education and other systems. I think one of the things that's really good that came out of that was the National PTA did a survey of Democratic and Republican and independent parents and found that 76% of parents want schools to teach respect, cooperation, and empathy, not hatred, violence, and antagonism and discrimination. And also 75% of parents feel it's important to have programs or policies to make sure that all students feel safe, heard, and included. And National Place used that opportunity to work with our members to develop a parent bill of rights that we think is important and is very consistent with that PTA, those PTA findings, the right to be treated with respect, to be involved as an equal partner in educational decision-making, to be treated equitably and not face discrimination, rights around access to records and being involved in decision-making, information, et cetera. And you can go to our website, www.parentsathetable.org, if you want to see the National Place Parents' Bill of Rights. Another important topic overall, which is related to the dueling visions of Parents' Bill of Rights, is family engagement. So what does family engagement mean? Who gets to define it? What is the role of parent centers in the education system, of family-to-family health information centers in the health system, et cetera, in building it and supporting it, in partnering with federal, state, and local agencies in making it happen, and also in making sure that state lead agencies, both in early intervention and in special education, and all of the systems that serve children and families can recognize and benefit from the value add of family-led organizations that are staffed almost 100% by parents with lived experience in that field. So if you look at parent centers, for example, you see the very vast majority of parents are parents of children with disabilities who have walked that walk and lived that experience. And it's an increasingly diverse workforce, so we have many, many more staff at parent centers that represent those voices and experiences of families that too often are not at the decision-making table at any level. Another important issue for parents, and you can hear this when we have conversations with parent centers as well, is the issue of equity and the backlash against it. And of course, in any system, whenever you try to change it and try to make it be more equitable and people see it as a zero-sum game, you often will have a situation where the people who have more attack the people who have less and are trying to get an equitable share of the resources and the access. And so we are certainly seeing a backlash against it. And it's not just a backlash against equity on the basis of race or ethnicity, immigrant status, language, socioeconomic status, but we are also seeing an increasing backlash against issues around disability. And I think there are many people who have talked about the fact that if they come for one of us in the morning and we don't do anything about it, they're going to be coming for the rest of us at night. And I think it's really important that those of us in the disability advocacy and community recognize that that there's no special sacred place that disability holds, that disability is still an area of discrimination, and that we all have to stick together, all of us who face discrimination, no matter what the reason for it. Another important issue for families is the issue of breaking down silos. And I do have to say, in this administration, we've seen the Department of Education and the Department of Health and Human Services work together much, much more than in many previous administrations, which is really good to see. But the issue of silos is a real one for families. Children and families don't come in pieces, but the systems that are intended to serve them often are very siloed. And the truth of the matter is that one system often doesn't even know what another system offers, or the eligibility criteria, or how it operates. And so families have to go to multiple doors to be able to figure out how to get all the supports that they need. And I think when we're talking about the funding cuts that we've heard about, the potential funding cuts that we've heard about, this is only going to get worse because when you have fewer dollars to provide services, there's not as much interest in letting people know about the services that are available because you may not even be able to meet all the needs. And we know that all already exists because the Child Care Development Block Grant already doesn't provide enough funding for all of the eligible children. The other thing that's really difficult around silos is that systems often may have competing roads or pathways in order to access services that can be very confusing for families. And so this is another important reason why that we really advocate on behalf of family-led, family-serving organizations, because we often are the ones that we have the direct experience in navigating multiple systems and can provide that support to families. So another really big area of interest and concern for families and for all of us in this room is the issue about federal, state, and local budget issues, and not just about education. Again, if you're the parent of a child with a disability, you have to worry not just about cuts to special education. You have to worry about cuts to health care, to Medicaid, to state children's health insurance program. You have to worry about cuts to recreational services. You have to worry about cuts to YMCAs, after-school programs, before-school programs, child care. These are all critical issues. And all families are impacted by that, but families of children with disabilities are more impacted by that because, for example, a child with a disability is more likely to be poor than a child without a disability. A child with a disability is more likely to grow up in a single-parent household than a child without a disability. So the resources that are important for low-income children and for children who live in single-parent households are even more critical for children with disabilities. And we're seeing so many attacks on those resources. If Head Start is cut the way that we're talking about, which I don't anticipate, but if that kind of cut goes for Head Start, then we will see an incredible negative impact on the lives of families of children with disabilities, not just today but into the future, because Head Start is such an important resource. Another really important issue is the issue of the long-term impact of COVID, and we're hearing this a lot from families. Parent centers are starting to hear now from families of children who have long COVID, as well as parents who have long COVID. And that is something that we really still don't have our arms around. And there seems to be an effort on the part of some legislators to kind of run away from COVID, except to complain about how schools were closed during COVID, and to pretend that somehow COVID isn't still a problem, to not address the reality of things like long COVID. And so that is something that I think we're going to see and hear more about in the future as it becomes a more commonly known issue. Also, making up for lost time and lost services. Many children, we talk about the young children who didn't have access to socialization and interaction with non-disabled peers, but we also have the youth who went through the entire period of their transition without any transition services. And and at the same time, many VR agencies weren't offering services. So families are very concerned about making up for lost time and lost services, not just for their young children, but all the way through now their young adults who are still suffering from the effects of not having access to good services. One of the most important things that parents are concerned about is the exacerbated personnel shortages and what this means. What it means for instruction, what it means for least restrictive environment, related services, discipline, the administrative leadership, and family engagement. When you don't have enough personnel to be able to fulfill the functions in a school or in a district, or even at a state agency, then the work isn't getting done. And so your children aren't getting served as well. There isn't the same energy to engage with families and to involve them at all levels. And this is something that we're hearing more and more from parent centers. We know we've been hearing it from professional organizations, but parent centers are telling us that this issue of, so we've got children that now have compensatory services that have been ordered, and there's nobody to provide the compensatory services. You have, the intent is there, and yet the actual resources, the money is even there, but the resources are not there. The human resources are not there to provide the services. So, and there's also a related thing, which is related to COVID, which is the fact that everybody in the system, families, students, children, professionals, are all starting out further along towards the end of their rope than we did before we lived through what we just lived through, and before we're living through what we're living through now in terms of the so-called culture wars, but as Kuna said, really the reaction against equity. And so when you have everybody already starting off closer to the end of your rope, it's very difficult to be able to implement that positive behavior support plan, or be civil with each other when you disagree, and use it as an opportunity to create agreement. And right now, nothing that's happening in Congress is helping. It's only exacerbating that, because it's making the conversation at local levels in many states very toxic. I have to say that I think one of the things that parent centers have been very appreciative of is the department during this time period, because the guidance that the department has issued around during COVID, coming out of COVID, all of that guidance, the discipline guidance, both from the Office of Special Ed and Rehabilitative Services and the Office for Civil Rights, that was something that was really, really important for parents, for students, and for parent centers, as well as for school personnel. Because in addition to letting everybody, reminding everybody what the law said, we also learned some really great practices. And I have to say, the amazing resources, including the 200 new resources that the department can offer, are really valuable and helpful. And parent centers share them with families all the time. We just need to make sure that the people on the ground are getting that information. Parent centers are also very concerned with the lack of accountability, and supportive of efforts to improve implementation of the law and the regulations and the guidance that benefit children with disabilities and their families, and strengthen accountability at all levels. And we were very pleased that the department, just in time for the conference, came out with the general supervision guidance, because we agree with the department that there needs to be a refocus on the whole array of responsibilities of state lead agencies. I will, with that, I will just say I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today. I want to thank all of the parent centers in the room, because parent centers are boots on the ground. And none of us could do our work without parents, and in fact, none of us would have a job if it wasn't for parents. So